morning out there, and welcome back to another grand edition of Metal Band's Chronicles. And today we got an album ranking coming at you. One of my all-time favorite bands. I've loved this band since the late 80s. You know, since I first heard Among the Living back when I was 9 years old, which would have been in 1988. And right away, I just fell in love with this band. Of course, I'm talking about the almighty Anthrax. One of the greatest thrash metal bands ever. It upsets me now that people think they should be kicked out of the Big Four. I mean, people have their opinions. I don't think they should be. But anyways, before we get into this album ranking, let's have a swig of coffee, why don't we? Since it is fairly early in the morning here. Oh boy, now my ranking's going to be very different and quite controversial compared to some people's rankings here. Because my least favorite Anthrax album is a lot of people's maybe in-between album. But this album, oh man, I don't hate it. But, again, to me, this album's way too alternative metal sounding. I'm talking about the 2003 album, We've Come For You All. Yeah, this one's definitely going to be debatable to a lot of people. I'm sorry, man, a lot of this album I cannot really get into. Like, the opening track's killer. What Doesn't Die, that's a killer track. In fact, I remember when I first bought this back in 2003. When that track kicked in, I'm like, oh, this is going to be a great Anthrax album. And at that time, I remember Scott Ian bragging that this album was going to be much thrashier and much heavier. But boy, sadly, after that, that's not really the case. Now, this album's not completely terrible. Like, Strappin' On's a great track. Black Dahlia's a fucking cool track with blast beats in it. And the title track, We've Come For You All. That's a pretty darn cool track. The rest of it, like Cadillac Rockbox, just doesn't even sound like Anthrax. And don't get me wrong, I know Anthrax has always experimented. And you're going to see that when we go through these albums. But this album just never really completely grabbed me. But yeah, that's number 11. Oh yeah, by the way, if I forgot to mention, Anthrax does have 11 studio albums that we're going through. Up next, and it's the only Anthrax I don't have a physical copy of anymore. I used to have it. And that would be 1998's Volume 8, The Threat Is Real. I used to have it, I don't have it anymore. Again, another Anthrax album that's just kind of so-so. You know. Now, there's a couple cool tracks on it, like Crush. The opening track's killer. Killing Box with Phil Anselmo's killer. The track Inside Out's actually kind of good, I think. Even though it does have more of a groove, modern metal type of feel to it, but a lot of Volume 8, The Threat Is Real, to me is very forgettable. And it's a very long album. I believe it had like 15 tracks on it. Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty forgettable album too. It's not like completely terrible. There are moments. I would say maybe another good track is Born Again Idiot. That's probably the thrashiest, punkiest sounding track on that album, but besides that, it's pretty forgettable. Up next, we got 1995's Stomp 442. Honestly, I don't think this is as bad as people say it is. It's got its moments. Random Act of Senseless Violence is a really cool track. King Size is pretty cool. You know, which has Dimebag Darrell guest appear on it, you know, from Pantera. Let's see, what else? Riding Shotgun, I think's okay. In a Zone's probably one of the better tracks on here. But again, it's another album where Anthrax is really going through the motions. They had signed to Elektra Records, or maybe, nah, that was on Sound of White Noise, I'm wrong. But anyways, this came out on Elektra also, and it basically got no promotion. I mean, I remember buying it back in 1995 when it first came out, and, you know, it had no promotion, nobody really cared about the album, and, you know, rightfully so. It was the 90s, you know, grunge is huge. And again, on here you can tell this has more of an alternative metal, groove metal type of sound, as opposed to, you know, thrash metal sound. Okay, up next. Got a little hard to rank these in the middle. I picked Worship Music from 2011. Now, this is a very good album. This is where Joey Belladonna returned. Oh, yeah, by the way, on the previous albums, they had John Bush on vocals, naturally. Yeah, I forgot to mention that. But anyways, this is where Joey Belladonna made his comeback to Anthrax. And, all in all, it's a good album. But you can tell it wasn't written for Joey Belladonna. It seems like they had John Bush in mind when they wrote this. Now, at the time, they did have a singer before Joey Belladonna that didn't work out, named Dan Nelson. And Dan Nelson wrote a lot of the lyrics on here, from my understanding. But yeah, Joey's back in the band. I mean, there's a couple cool tracks, like Fight 'Em Till You Can't. Trying to see the track listings on here. Oh, okay. Earth on Hell, that's a great track. Fight 'Em Till You Can, another killer track. Those are like the two songs that definitely harken back to that Persistence of Time, Among the Living type of sound, you know, a little bit of State of Euphoria. But again, you get a lot of the more alternative metal type of sounds again on this album. It's still decent, don't get me wrong. But yeah, Worship Music. In at number 8. Okay, now we're up to number 7. And it was kind of hard to rank these, like I said, because I thought I would rank this one a step higher, but I didn't. I'm talking about the 2016 album For All Kings. Now, this album is much better than Worship Music, in my opinion. For some reason, man, this album gets a lot of hate. I don't know why. I think this album goes back to more of that thrash sound, as opposed to, you know, the albums that came before it. Yeah, there's still, like, the modern metal influences on, you know, this album. But you got, like, thrashy tunes like Zero Tolerance, which is by far the thrashiest thing Anthrax put on disc since probably Persistence of Time or Among the Living. You know what I mean? But yeah, man, there's some great tracks on here. Gotta Believe's a great track. You know, what else? For All Kings, the title track's great. Evil Twins, man, it's a really killer thrashy tune. And this right here is the debut of the Shadowfall guitarist on lead guitar. Josh, I forget his name right now. But anyways, yeah, this comes in at number 7. So now we're down to, alright, yeah, number 7, okay. Up next, we got the 1993 album, the debut album with John Bush on vocals. Of course, I'm talking about Sound of White Noise. I think this is a great album. You know, there's a couple weak tracks on here, but, you know, for the most part, killer stuff. Potter's Field is an excellent opener. You know, Only's a pretty well-written track. Room for One More, Package Rebellion, High Pro Glow. It's one of my favorite tracks on here. Then you got underrated tracks like 1,000 Points of Hate, Invisible. You know, Burst is a thrashy tune, you know. Black Lodge is a great, dark, melodic tune. I mean, yeah, man. Sound of White Noise, the first with John Bush, definitely a killer album, in at number 6. Now we're down to the top 5. Okay. Man, this one I thought would actually rank a little higher. And I was going back and forth with these next two, and wow. And this was another one of my favorite Anthrax albums as a kid. And probably the second album I heard by Anthrax. I'm talking about the 1988 album, State of Euphoria. The band hates this freaking album. They said they were rushed when they made it to get back out on tour. I mean, Scott Ian and Charlie Benetti have stated that they felt like the album wasn't complete. I don't know. I think it sounds okay. Be All End All's a killer track. Out of Sight, Out of Mind's pretty decent. Make Me Laugh, you know. Antisocial, I could live without. I've heard that song so many times. It's a cover song, obviously, by the band, or from the band Trust, you know. Who Cares Wins has to be my favorite track on here. That is just such a killer freaking track. Now It's Dark. I've always loved Now It's Dark. You know, then you got deep cuts like Schism, which I think Schism's a great track. Misery Loves Company. 13's a bit goofy. And Finale, the final track on here, Finale is tremendous. Yeah, coming in at number 5, State of Euphoria. Alright, now coming in at number 4. And this would be the third Anthrax album I ever heard. I'm talking about the 1990 album, Persistence of Time. This is just a tremendous freaking album. This album's much darker. It's got a bit more of a progressive edge to it. The songs are much longer, you know. And the band just seems much more serious on this album, you know, compared to in the past. Which, at the time, you know, there was starting to be infightings within the band, you know, especially with Joey Belladonna. I believe their studio had burnt down at the time when they were recording this album, and they lost a good bit of their equipment, you know. But this is a freaking tremendous album. Time, great track. Blood, you know, another tremendous track. Keep It in the Family, pretty controversial. Well, nowadays, you know. But it's a killer, brutal, heavy track. You know, much more slower, Sabbath type of heaviness to it. In My World, you know, that's the track, you know, they played on an episode of Married with Children. However, it's not one of my favorite tracks. Gridlock, I think, is fucking underrated. Like, everybody that talks about this album always rips on that track for some reason. I've always liked it. Gridlock, black. I've always liked Gridlock for some reason. Intro to Reality, Belly of the Beast, man. Freaking awesome. You know, you got the Time, you know, a Joe Jackson cover, which is pretty decent. Hatred's one of the most underrated. Actually, these last 3 tracks on here are so underrated. Hatred, One Man Stands, and Discharge. Just absolutely underrated tracks. But yeah. Persistence of Time, in at number 3. Right? I'm sorry, number 4. I'll tell you what, I better take another drink of my cup of joe here. Okay. Boy. And I could not find my CD of this, so I broke out my cassette. Anyways, coming in at number 3, and this used to be my number 1 for the longest freaking time, just like a lot of people. A lot of people would definitely put this at number 1, and rightfully so, because it's an iconic album, and this is the album that got me into Anthrax way back as a kid. Talking about the 1987 iconic Among the Living. Great album. Great album. What more could be said about this? Holy cripe. The opening riffs, too, Among the Living, with that dark intro and the heavy riffs. Come on, man. It doesn't get any better than that. You got thrash anthems like Caught in a Mosh on here. You know, you got a song about Judge Dredd, I Am the Law. You got NFL, Nice Fucking Life. And A Skeleton in the Closet, which a lot of people would say is the weakest track. Probably on Among the Living. I disagree. I think it's an awesome track. Indians is killer. One World is killer. You know, there's not many deep cuts on this album, but yeah, One World would be a deep cut, and I think it's tremendous. ADI, which is a short little acoustic intro. I'm not sure what it means, but it goes into horror of it all. Tremendous track. Again, another deep cut, which I think is tremendous. And Imitation of Life, what a killer track, which the riff was lifted from an SOD track, which would turn into an MOD track. I'm talking about Aren't You Hungry? From the 1987 album, which they use a different intro riff for the 87 version for MOD on the Methods of Destruction debut album. USA for MOD, but when SOD reformed in 1999, they did Aren't You Hungry on the Bigger Than the Devil comeback album from 99, and they re-recorded that track with the original intro, which was the Imitation of Life intro, which originally is Are You Hungry? Interesting facts. Okay, number two. Number two could easily be a number one too, because I love this freaking album. Talking about the very first album with Joey Belladonna, Spreading the Disease. Great album. Great album. I mean, you got great tracks like Lone Justice, Madhouse, the first video they ever made. You know, you got underrated tracks like Aftershock on here, The Enemy, SSC, Stand or Fall, which SSC, again, is another little acoustic intro before it goes into Stand or Fall, excuse me there. Armed and Dangerous, lifted from the EP. This version of Armed and Dangerous is a tad different than the EP version. I think I might like the EP version just a little better. Medusa, what a killer track. I love the guitar riff in that track. And then Gung Ho is just straight up speed metal, blasting double bass fury. Yeah, man, killer way to end this great album. You know, AIR, the opening track. Which, ironically, I love AIR, but it's my least favorite track on here. I think the other tracks are way better than this. But anyways, classic debut album, and, well, that leads us to number one, and number one nobody's going to agree with, probably. But it's been my favorite Anthrax album for quite some time now, and I did a review on it on my old YouTube channel back in 2018, and I stated in that review, this is my favorite Anthrax album. So coming in at number one, the debut album, Fist Full Metal, the only album they did with Neil Turbin on vocals and Danny Lilker on bass, who, you know, would go on to do SOD, Nuclear Assault, Brutal Truth, The Ravenous, and a plethora of other brutal bands. Yes, Fistful of Metal is my favorite Anthrax album. I just love it. I love the raw energy of it. I love the raw production. And I know a lot of people wouldn't rank this album number one or maybe in their top five, but I just really love Fistful of Metal. To me, that's some of the all-time greatest Anthrax songs, like Death Rider, the opening track, just killer stuff, metal thrashing mad. Alright, I'm 18. It's a great cover, though, but okay, that track I could kind of live without, but you know what? It's still a decent Alice Cooper cover. Panic is just ferocious speed metal, even though I like the Armed and Dangerous version of Panic a bit better because it's played faster. Then you got underrated tracks like Subjugator on here. You know, just a killer track. You know, Soldiers of Metal, Death from Above is killer. The title track, Anthrax, again, another killer track. you know, Across the River, a short little Iron Maiden influenced instrumental, you know. Then you got the last track, Howling Furies. This is my favorite Anthrax album, people. I know people will have different opinions, but that's fine. We're allowed to have different opinions. Anyways, that's it for my Anthrax rankings video. Stay tuned for more here on Metal Bends Chronicles. And man, make sure you hit that bell, because YouTube for some reason is not sending out these notifications. So, and they're doing this to a lot of channels too. It's not just my channel. There's a lot of channels out there that the notifications aren't being sent out. So therefore people aren't seeing the videos. You know. So yeah, definitely hit that bell. Hit that subscribe button if you like what you see, and keep it metal.